get to offer up ourselves to each other and to the Lord. And I was really convicted because I was thinking so much about what do I want to plan for prayer time. Then I was reminded by the Apostle Jude that he commands us to keep ourselves in the love of God, wait on the mercy of Jesus Christ, and pray in the Holy Spirit. And one thing that isn't there is me, and the three things that are there, / one thing, is God. So I just encourage you as we offer up our prayers and praises to each other and to the Lord, that we do it to the Lord. That being said, I'd love to hear what's on your hearts this morning as we pray for one another. Anyone?
Joy, I have one.
Here.
Oh, yeah.
I'll come to you.
Thank you. And I wanted to use the mic because I really need to let you guys know the power of prayer. We've been praying for my dad for quite some time. He's been dealing with some intense, debilitating pain. And in the midst of it, we've lost my sister. And so it's been a really tough road for him. I went to an appointment with him. It was kind of our last hope for this doctor. And this doctor showed my father just immense compassion and love. And I mean, it was really cool to see. So anyway, my dad is going to have a surgery on the 25th of May. There is, it may not work, it may work, but here's where we're at with my dad. As I sat across lunch with him that day, his whole demeanor had changed, and I said, Daddy, I just want to let you know that for a very long time the church has been praying for you. And with tears in his eyes, he looked across at me, he said, would you please tell them to keep praying, because I need this to work. So, there you go, guys. Thank you so much, and let's keep praying. The surgery's on the 25th. I don't know what time, but it doesn't matter. Thanks.
Amen. That's a huge praise. So thankful to see how much prayer even affects his heart. Also, Evan's running in the background. Nancy.
I'd like to ask prayers also for my dad. Since my mom spoke, we've been having a tough time with it. And his history medical stuff, which we thought was over and done, starting to come back. So he's coming up to Mayo sometime soon. Please pray that God be with him on his heart and also on whatever is going on with his body.
Absolutely. I'd love to continue praying for that and the rest of your family too. Anyone else? Mark.
Just a quick follow-up. We want to ask for prayer for our children, that their paperwork for immigration back into the United States for the two adopted daughters would go through quickly and smoothly. Bureaucracies can be a little headache, so just pray for that movement so that they can come back this summer.
Absolutely. We'll be praying for that.
I have a praise report too. I had a fantastic opportunity to go to California last week and be with my dad, who is also sick. And there's nothing really that they can do to help him, but we were able to have a really just sweet time together, and so I'm really thankful for that. And then also, my younger sister had to have an emergency C-section at 33 weeks pregnant yesterday, and they expected the baby would need a vent and feeding tube and incubator and all those things, and he doesn't need any of that. I mean, he's going to need to be in the NICU for a while, but he's doing really, really well. So super exciting, and I'm just praying for my sister Jeannie. She and her husband are not believers, but they would see God in this situation.
Yes, absolutely.
My husband's grandpa had surgery last week. We had found out that he had stage 4 bladder cancer. That's a lot worse than I thought it was. So they're meeting with the doctor Monday. So just praying for wisdom in the doctor's hands and peace with whatever the answer is. Miss Corey. We lost a student, last week on Saturday night after prom. It was a suicide, and so I've been dealing with a lot of high schoolers this past week, who are just really, questioning and trying to find some hope and healing. So just prayers for our student community and for the ministers who are involved with that group. I know we have a lot of college students that are in this community, but the kids that I deal with are primarily high schoolers. So just prayers for them as they process this loss, and that they would see Jesus' hand in it.
Got one more.
For all the college students, I just want to throw out some prayer for this upcoming week and finals week after. I don't know, for me it's going to be a really tough week, and I imagine for many others as well. So just pray that we remember that our hope is in God and not in our grace or in our performance, and that He gives us the strength.
Right. God rest with me. God, we come before you in recognition, even just from our prayer requests, that we are weak and needy. And there is nothing ultimately that we can do to help ourselves. Even when we run from you, you are there. Even the things that we do use to run from you, you gave us. And there is no escaping you. That is a wonderful thing. Because trying to show us that you want us to come back to you. You want us to lean on you in our need in front of you, in our weakest, and most embarrassing state. Where we are weak, you are strong, Lord. And we praise you for that. We thank you for who you are, even as we acknowledge the hard things that we are going through, and these prayers that we lift up and praises, Lord. Your sovereign hand is over all of them. We thank you so much for that. And Jesus, we ask, knowing that you hear, that you would move in every single situation, said and unsaid, in this room right now. Your power is so great that nothing, no one is too far gone. So Lord, I want to lift up prayers for Lori's dad. Lord, just praise you that he sees that we are praying. I pray that that would go further into his heart, that he would come to you and thank you for your power working through the situation. And Lord, just as he even asked, Lord, we continue to lift up prayers for him. As he faces the surgery in about a month, Lord, it's yet another scary thing, very uncertain, going through so much pain. And Lord, we lift up prayers for him, and that you are the God who can heal. And you do. Lord, in the same way we pray for Anthony as dad, for his heart condition, spiritually, or his medical condition. For Lord, having just come off of splitting with Anthony and his mom, but he feels really lost right now. I just pray that in that lostness you would speak to him. That where he is trying to run, that you would show yourself to him. And you would help him just to see even the folly of running away from you. Lord, that being said, we still do just pray for him and his well-being. That you would heal his family. And God, again, just that your hand would be at work. Lord, we pray for Mark and his children, adopted children, and how paperwork and bureaucracy can sometimes be slower than we want. I just pray that you be with that situation and with the children and Mark and Carol, and that paperwork would go through quickly. Just that. In that, they would see your glory. And that at the end of it all, Lord willing, that they would come, the children would come to Mark and Carol, and that they would just praise you for that. God, really, God, who showers us with blessings. You shower us so abundantly. Our response should be to thank you, and I pray that we would do just that, even in these hard times. I pray that for Mark and Carol too. Lord, pray for sick dad, another sick dad. That was so sweet and uplifting. That even in the face of death, they can be content and just know that you are there with them. Lord, I'm so pray for her sister's C-section, that maybe it was a panic, but God, we praise you that it went well. That a baby of 33 weeks is thriving as much as a baby can be. Thank you for that, Lord. Again, we see your power. Then we see your glory. Then we see all the things that you are. Lord, we just ask that you help us to see more of that and to continue to praise you for that. And we all join together in praise and one prayer. But Lord, that's so amazing because it's not just one member who's looking at this prayer. It's all of us as a local body. And Lord, you hear all of us. Pray for Laura's husband's grandpa. Lord, with the stage 4 bladder cancer, or stage 4 anything is not looking good. Again, with another uncertain medical diagnosis and an uncertain future, I just pray that you be with him in that you would give the doctor, and for that matter, the doctors in every one of these situations, wisdom. And that they would be amazed with how you've created our bodies, and that you would just use that fascination to help them heal. Again, Lord, even if these situations come to pass and they aren't in our favor, we recognize that, Lord, you are still working for good in these situations. Just pray that for Laura too. And also join Mary in lifting up prayers for a student who committed suicide recently in the high schoolers, or the group of high schoolers that she's been working with. Even the school minds is closely felt. As we remember Michael and his suicide in March. Our people are hurting. People are hurting with more than just medical problems, God. These are problems of the soul. Problems of no purpose, of depression, of feeling left out, excluded, not feeling loved. God, I pray that you would strengthen Mary and every minister to these high schoolers and to any of these students who are facing mental health problems. God, that you would use them to show that you love them. And their joy, their peace can be found in you. And all you want, Lord, is for them to cast their anxieties that pain them so much on you. You always welcome us with open arms, no matter what state we're in. I just pray that you would be with these high schoolers, be with these college students, and everyone who's struggling with mental health, Lord. And lastly, I pray again just for college students, but again, all students, as we're nearing the end of the COVID school year. Lord, as one of them, I can speak that we are tired. We're tired, but just as Corinne prayed, and thank you so much that she prayed this. That, Lord, our hope is in you. Our strength is in you. And you alone. Jesus, how often we focus on such marginal things when we remember the cross, remember the resurrection, remember your life, and your comfort and your love. That you are the King before all time and now and forever. are with us always, even to the end of the age. Jesus, help us to remember you in these things. We lift them up to you, knowing that you hear. In your name we pray. Amen.
Well, we are continuing today in our teaching series on the book of Daniel, and as we've been discussing, the book of Daniel is a book written by exiles for exiles, and as we are followers of Jesus, we recognize that our true home is, of course, heaven, and anywhere we live on earth, whether it be the United States, Canada, Mexico, Russia, wherever it might be, is what the Bible describes as the world. And so, as citizens of heaven, we truly live in this world as exiles. And the call that God places on exiles is to not just assimilate and to just go with the flow and to be so much like the world that we have nothing to offer, but also the call is not just to escape or to hide or to fail at loving and serving the world. And so we're called to seek the welfare of wherever it is that God has placed us. And that's what Daniel's about, and that's what we're looking into here in the book of Daniel. And as we reach chapter 3, it's interesting that as we move through the chapters, the focus, or I guess the star of each chapter kind of shifts. In chapter 1, Daniel is the main character. In chapter 2, it's more about Nebuchadnezzar. And now as we reach chapter 3, it's about Daniel's 3 friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, or as we know them by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Or if you're familiar with the VeggieTales movie, Rakshak and Benny. And the story we're looking at today is, of course, the very well-known, famous story about these men being thrown into the fiery furnace. Right? You've probably heard this before, even if you haven't grown up in church. If you have lived for any amount of time in the Western world, you have heard about the fiery furnace. And you probably have some familiarity with this passage, even if it is just VeggieTales memories. You're probably sort of familiar with it. And what's interesting in this story is that these guys are only referred to by their Babylonian names. They're only referred to as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because at this point, they're supposed to be living as Babylonians, not as Israelites anymore. And that's what Nebuchadnezzar wants. He wants them to be fully assimilated, fully following the Babylonian way of life. But as we see in this chapter, that hasn't happened. They still have a faith that defines who they are, and that is still how they live. And so this is what we're actually going to be looking at today, is their faith. And as we've been talking through the book of Daniel, we've discovered that the entire book can basically be summarized as, despite all appearances, God is in control, and he gives us what we need to be faithful in exile. And in different chapters, we've seen God giving his people different things. And in chapter 3 here, what God gives is faith. God gives these 3 men faith. And he gives a faith that can endure the pressure, the temptation, and the pain of exile. So that's where we're looking today. God gives us a faith that can endure the pressure, the temptation, and the pain of exile. Before we go a little further, a thing about faith, and that is that typically when we think of faith, a lot of the times we'll use like a metaphor or the picture of faith like a muscle, and we'll think of faith as a muscle that we need to work out or get stronger or grow. But I don't think this is exactly how we should view faith. Because then when we stand before challenges in life, we look at that challenge like we do working out, and we look at the weights on a bar and we think, am I strong enough or am I not? Do I have enough faith or do I not? But instead, I want to suggest that instead of viewing faith like a muscle, we view faith like a lens through which we see the world. Because faith is a lens through which we rightly see the world. And so it's not something that we need to grow or get stronger. It's simply something that maybe the gunk needs to be cleared off, that needs to be made clearer so that we can rightly see the world. And here's the difference. I think if we view faith like a muscle, we look at our challenges and we think, do I have enough faith for that? Do I have enough faith maybe if something is going on in our lives? If we're going to pray for a loved one, do I have enough faith to activate God and bring healing? And it's almost like, well, God's looking for us to have 70 faith points in order to heal cancer, and we might only have 40, and so, Really, we should just pray for the flu and things like that that are more on our level. And we look at these events in our lives and we think, do I have enough faith? Am I strong enough? Can I handle this? And that puts the focus of our faith where? On us, right? Am I strong enough? Do I have what it takes? Have I worked hard enough to do this? Instead of when we view faith as a lens that is simply supposed to be pointed on the object of our faith, on Jesus, on God. And this is the way that I think faith should be viewed. Not as a muscle, but as a lens. And when we view faith like a lens through which we see the world, instead of wondering, do I have enough to overcome this? Do Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have enough faith to overcome Babylon? Instead, they see Nebuchadnezzar for who he really is. He's the most powerful man on the planet. They see the furnace for what it really is, very hot. But they also see that compared to God, even the most powerful man on the planet is nothing. And compared to God and what he can do, even the hottest furnace can be cool. And so viewing faith like a lens, I think can help us. Because then we just focus on God, on his strength, on what he gives. And when we face the cultural pressure, when we face idols, when we face suffering, we don't look at ourselves and think, do I have what it takes? We look at God and what he provides. And so this is what happens in this chapter. That Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God provides a faith for them. And now it starts out in chapter 3 with Nebuchadnezzar being a grumpy guy again. Nothing new. Every chapter he's angry. And you might remember from last week that because of a bad dream, Nebuchadnezzar woke up and wanted to kill all the astrologers, the wise men, and all the leaders of the religions of Babylon because they couldn't meet his unreasonable request of telling him what his dream was and then interpreting it. So Daniel prayed, and God revealed the dream to him, and he went and he told Nebuchadnezzar the dream. And he told Nebuchadnezzar, you dreamt about a statue, and you were the head of gold, and that represented your kingdom, and then the other parts of the statue were made of other metals, and that represented other kingdoms that were going to take your place and come after you. Now Nebuchadnezzar was so inspired, but also troubled by that dream, that now in chapter 3, he thinks it's not good enough to just be the head of gold. Now he has constructed an entire statue made of gold. 90 feet of gold, almost to say, I don't want other kingdoms to come after me. I am going to rule forever. My kingdom is going to last forever. And he sets up this image. Sets up this big statue in the middle of the desert, 90 feet of gold, and he wants to unify his empire around the worship of this image. And it's interesting, it doesn't tell us what the image was, and that's intentional, because if you remember in chapter 2 before this, that statue, it didn't say who it was or what it was, just that it represented these nations, it represented these kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar was the gold head, and then the others were other kingdoms, all put into this image. And so here, most scholars agree it wasn't of Nebuchadnezzar, but it was just some kind of ambiguous image that would represent the nation of Babylon. It was just a representation of Babylon. And I think, if you look at a comparison, we could look at like the Statue of Liberty today, right? Who is she? No, she's no one. She's not an actual person. She's just an image that represents someone. And in the same way, this is what this image was. It was an image that just represented Babylon. It represented their nation. And the point is that Nebuchadnezzar wanted everyone to worship it and to worship Babylon. That they would all be united around the worship of his empire. And so, he gathers all the most powerful people, sets up an orchestra around this image, and when the music plays, they're all supposed to bow down, right? We're familiar with this story. They were supposed to automatically respond to the music with worship of this image. And out in the plains of Dura, where the statue was set up, there would be thousands, if not potentially tens of thousands of people, all bowed down, worshiping this image. And this is the pressure. This is the pressure that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego face. They're out there with the crowd. They are told this music is going to play, and you are going to join everyone else and bow to this image. But they don't do it. They don't bow down. and they practice what is called non-participation, right? When the pressure is on to go with the flow and to just assimilate and to bow down, they don't do it. They refuse. And this is the first thing that I think real faith sees. Real faith sees non-participation as the response to the cultural pressure. When the pressure is on to bow down and to worship his idol, they just don't. They just don't participate. But of course, the Chaldeans, who are essentially the high priests of Babylon, they kind of run all the religious systems. These are the very guys that Daniel saved in our last chapter. Well, they snitch on our boys, and they go tell Nebuchadnezzar that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't bow down, and it throws Nebuchadnezzar into a rage. So we'll pick that up in verse 13. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are dragged before Nebuchadnezzar. And we read in verse 13. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now," he's going to give them a second chance here, "when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I have made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" So stop there. Okay, so he's put this pressure on them. He's told them that you are going to bow down to this image. And the interesting thing is, with a nation like Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar didn't expect that they wouldn't still worship their other gods. Babylon was huge. It stretched from Egypt all the way to India, and it was full of a lot of different religions, and their whole point was that they would let anyone worship any religion they wanted to, as long as they also worshiped Babylon. But as Bible-believing Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego couldn't do that. They couldn't just add these other idols. They couldn't add the worship of Babylon to their faith, because they're following the Ten Commandments, right? The first of the Ten Commandments is, "You shall have no other gods but me." No idols. No worshiping other gods. The second is that you shall not make for yourself an image in order to worship me. Don't make an image of God. And so this is both of those things, the first two commandments. And now the reason that God didn't want them to make an image is because God didn't want us to get confused between creator and created things, right? Not to reduce God to something less than what he really is. And now if you remember, if anyone had listened to the podcast from last week, right? Did anyone listen to episode number 2? Awesome. Good, a few of us. So if you remember there, then you remember the discussion about images, about the word tselem, right? And one of the other reasons God didn't want us to make images is because he already made images, right? And we need to make more images, but in a very different way, right? What did God create as his image? It's not a trick question, yeah. Us, people. And so you are an image. You're sitting next to an image of God, and he said, don't create any wooden structures or gold or metal, because this is the way I'm supposed to be imaged. And so here, we've got these two things. We've got idol worship and an image, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego saying, no, we're not going to worship Babylon. We're not going to worship this idol. And Babylon was trying to be the god. They were trying to be that. And this was the pressure that they had on them. It was this pressure of idolatry. Now, in our culture, the idols don't have quite as clear or as obvious place in our lives. You know, typically people won't force you or threaten you to death for bowing down to the Statue of Liberty. Usually you just get to take a selfie in front of it, right? But idols, nonetheless, even if they're not as clear, they're still out there. They're still all around us. And see, in his book, Counterfeit Gods, Tim Keller described an idol as anything more fundamental than God to your happiness, meaning in life, or identity. He describes idols as being all around us, the things we daydream about. idols are no longer just statues that we bow down to. He says they're anything which we base more of our self-worth, our worldview, or our security on in God. Essentially, idols are those things that if they crumbled, we would have some kind of identity crisis. So they can be relationships, they can be possessions, they can be jobs, they can be ideas. It's what our life is focused on, other than God. And the thing with idols is that often the idol itself is not what's sinful, it's our relationship to that idol. It's our practice of going to that idol, hoping to get from it what we can only get from God. And that's how Ken Sande defines idols, as created things that we look to give us something only the Creator can give us. And this is really what makes them so sneaky. It makes them so dangerous, is that oftentimes idols can be good things. They can be good things. It can be your job, what God made you to do. And then before you know it, we sacrifice our families at the altar of our career. Right? Just have to work, just have to climb the ladder, no time for my spouse, no time for my kids, no time for reading the Bible. And even good things can become idols. I would even say that Christian doctrines can become idols at sometimes, right? We get so focused on our favorite part of Scripture or our favorite doctrine that we throw out everything else. And we take a good thing and we make it the ultimate thing. And we see this all the time. We see it all the time, especially, right, on the divide of, like, grace and truth, or, like, love and truth, right? It's so easy to take something good, like God is love, and to say, that's the ultimate thing, that's the only thing. And so, because God is love, he would never punish anyone, he would never call it sin, he would never seek justice on this. No, God is love, he would never do any of those things. And then instead of sounding like Jesus, when people are enslaved to sin, who says, go and sin no more, we sound more like the serpent who says, yeah, go ahead, it's great, it's fine. And then on the flip side, a lot of us can idolize truth, can idolize calling sin out, can idolize holiness. And we say, well, you know, it says God is love twice in the New Testament, but it says God is holy 200 times. And so that's all we should focus on. We should just be focused on calling out sin, on holiness standards, and we should just focus on that. And we make that the ultimate thing. And then the New Testament describes us as just sounding like a clanging gong. Just truth with no love. And we take these good, we can even make politics an idol. Right? Who's ready to get triggered? I figure, you know, we're just so united and no one really cares about politics that we can go here and no one will get upset, right? But it's true, right? All too often, we just swap out Jesus, insert political party, insert political candidate, insert cause, idea. And so many of us have traded out biblical agendas for important things and swapped out political agendas. Right? We see it on both sides of the political sphere. Something takes God's place. And instead of looking to the Scripture, we look to philosophy or what's most pragmatic, and those things become idols. See, idols are all around us. They're all around us. And it becomes really easy just to step in line and to bow down like everyone else. But at some point, we have to say no. At some point, we have to say, no, I can't do that. I can't go there. I can't participate. I know it's easier to just do what Nebuchadnezzar said, but I'm sorry, no. There will come a time when we have to do that, where we have to choose not to participate. You know, we saw it in chapter 1, with Daniel not eating food, and here it is again. Here it is again. And it's hard, but nonetheless, this is what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego chose, because of this faith that God gave them. And their faith truly is amazing. You know, they're in this new culture, they have everything taken from them, they have the pressure of death put on them, but still, they don't participate. And then they have, I think, the best response ever. In verse 16, Nebuchadnezzar threatens them again, gives them one more chance. And then in verse 16, they reply to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, Your Majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. And this is like the most polite little rebellion ever, right? No name calling, no hashtag never Nebi, right? Just Nebuchadnezzar wouldn't have even noticed them if they weren't ratted out, right? They just stood there, not bowing down. No theological debate, just, hey, we don't believe in your God. We don't need to defend ourselves in that. That's what we know to be true. You can kill us, that's fine. Still doesn't make you God. You know? We believe our God will save us, and even if he doesn't, we're fine with that too. Because even if he doesn't save us, you're still not God. And we just won't bow down to you. And this is where we see that real faith sees God is bigger than any idol. God is bigger than any idol. And this is how they're able to do this, how they're able to stand up to Nebuchadnezzar. Because they know that even in the face of death, God is bigger than that. Nebuchadnezzar, you don't actually hold the power of life and death in your hands. Sorry, you're just not God. And this is really cool. And it's really, I'm sure, infuriating to Nebuchadnezzar that they're so nice and peaceful about it, right? That they're so innocent. You know, they didn't try to lie about it or say, like, no, I was bowing, but, I had a cramp, so I had to stand up for a second. Or, yeah, it must have been someone else. It must have been some other Jews or something, not us. Or they didn't have, any kind of Spartacus event where they tried to lie and mix them up and tell them who's who. They just said, yeah, we did that. We're not going to bow down. And this is the beauty of their non-participation, is really their innocence here. Right? The fact that they were so not a threat to Nebuchadnezzar that they were a huge threat. Because they literally weren't doing anything wrong, just refusing to participate. There will come a time, as we see in some of the following chapters, when there should be active resistance, where these guys are going to be forced to actively resist Babylonians, but that's another chapter. In this chapter, it's simply this peaceful non-participation. They see clearly, through their lens of faith, who is God and who is not, who to obey and who not to obey. And so they chose. They chose, we're not going to obey you, we're going to obey God. And now every day in our lives, we're going to be faced with similar decisions, with split-second decisions of, do we worship God? Do we worship this? Is this an idol? Or do we follow the kingdom? And it takes a lot of discernment to navigate this life. If you've been walking with Jesus for any time, you'll know that. It takes a lot of discernment. While the question of WWJD is helpful a lot of the times, there are a lot of situations that are tricky. There's a lot of gray area. What would Jesus do? Well, Jesus didn't have a girlfriend, or Netflix, or all this money. And so it's tricky. It takes a lot of discernment. But there will come times when it's crystal clear. It's crystal clear, I'm sorry, I can't participate in this. You probably wouldn't check out those girls. You probably wouldn't say this about that person. And it'll be clear. I'm sorry, I won't lie to make this sale. I'm sorry, I won't cut corners on this construction project just to save money. We're not going to make a profit. Well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I won't say that I'm just an individual, not a church trying to rent the park, and so that I don't have to provide insurance. That one's real. I was like, oh man, I just told him it was me. Okay, but these things happen. These things come up all the time, and sometimes it's very clear we just can't participate in this thing. And there's a lot of power in that, as we see with the people who witnessed it around them. There's a lot. Imagine the impact that it could have with all of us in this room in situations like these where we choose simply, no, not going to do that. Not going to participate. It can have a huge impact on our community. Now here is a very famous picture from World War II that some of you have probably seen before. And this is a guy named August Landmaster. And it's at a Nazi rally in the late 1930s, and in this sea of people all doing their worship of Hitler thing is August just sitting there saying, nope, not into it, sorry, not going to participate. And I think this is like the best picture that we could see of what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego would have looked like, right? This sea of people who just say, nope, not really into that sort of thing, not really into the idol worship here. A little backstory is that August was dating a Jewish girl. All right, weird, it's only just got a girl involved, but nonetheless, he still resisted, and he still did this. Of course, he was thrown in prison, and eventually he was sent off to the front lines just to be cannon fodder, and he was killed in the war. But still, this legacy, this simple act of non-participation has lived on. And this picture has made it all around the world of him, one guy, in the sea of people, just saying, nope, not going to do it. And this was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in this case. Just saying, I'm not going to do it. But expecting that, well, we think God could save us. We think God could deliver us. But even if he doesn't, we're going to trust him. We're going to trust him, even if it goes bad. They knew that they were facing a lot of power and punishment. Because here's, I think, the last thing about real faith that we have to see is that real faith inevitably leads to a furnace. Real faith inevitably leads to the furnace. So Nebuchadnezzar was angry that they wouldn't bow down. So angry, he made the fire 7 times hotter, killed his own soldiers in the process. And the result of their faith and of obeying God was being thrown into this thing. And you have to wonder why. They were faithful to God. They stood their ground. But they were still thrown into the fire. Why? About 1,500 years later, the Apostle Peter writes, "Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal that has come on you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you." Don't be surprised. And often we have the opposite reaction, right? We're very surprised. We're like, wait, we took a stand for faith, we follow God, and yet we're still going to have to face the furnace? Why didn't things work out the way I thought they would, I took a stand, and now my friends are excluding me, or now I won't date this person, or now I have less money than those around me. And that's hard, and that is the risk, and that is, I would say, the guarantee of real faith, is that it leads to the furnace. This is what Jesus promises in John chapter 15, verse 18. He says, "If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Remember what I told you, a servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, then they will persecute you also." Throw that on the wall in your grandma's bathroom, right? We like to, remember the promises of God in the Bible, and hey, here's one for you. Here's one to name and claim. This is a promise of Jesus. That if you follow me, it's not going to be just like what happened to me. People are not going to like it. But I think if we just expect that, if we're not surprised by suffering, if we're not surprised by the furnace, then the pain and the difficulty of it can be lessened quite a bit, just simply by expecting it. Now, of course, it's still going to be difficult. It's still going to be hard. And there is still going to be times when the only response and the only thing we can do is to cry out to God and lament and say, this is hard, this is bad, I need help, I'm struggling. But I think so much of the difficulty of pain and suffering in our lives would be lessened if we just expected it. If we expected it from following God here. Because, as we see with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that no matter how nice you are, no matter how gracious you are, your non-participation will likely be a threat to someone. It will upset people. No matter how quiet or kind, non-participation carries with it this inherent suggestion that that is wrong. That I think there's a better way to live. And we can be as nice as we can, but regardless, to simply say no is to say, I think there's something better. And that will upset people. People will become angry and defensive and insecure. It will happen. Silly example is anytime I'm around friends of mine who eat really, really healthy, or maybe are vegan or vegetarian, I just want to tease them. I just want to. And I think the reason is because because when I hear people who really care about their health or have gotten into, the ethics of food, it makes me feel bad about eating hot dogs and Taco Bell. It does. I don't want to care that much about food, and I don't think I have the self-control to do it. And so I think, it'd be easier just to make their life hard than actually change mine. I can just tease that. And we can kind of see how that plays out, right? We can see how that can play out into other areas. That's a silly example, but I think, another one was back when I used to work at Costco, and I was back in the deli working with another coworker of mine, and the day before, a third coworker was just not basically doing their job, and so this coworker was just telling me exactly how she felt about the other person, and just slandering and gossiping and saying all these things, and she posed the question, like, you were there, you saw it, wouldn't you agree this is how she is? And I just said, I just don't want to say that, I just don't want to get into this conversation. Room was silent. 3 of our coworkers came in 10 minutes later, and the first thing out of this lady's mouth that I was in that room with was, "So Evan thinks I'm a B-word." And I thought, oh, what? Where did that come from? No, I didn't. I did not say that. And then we went on about how I refused to admit the truth about this, and I disagreed with her about this other situation. And I had no idea that me just choosing not to slander this other person was going to have that result. But that's what happens with non-participation. Sometimes we can be as nice as we can, we can be as gracious, but non-participation will inevitably be a threat to some people. It will make them defensive, it will make them feel insecure. That doesn't mean that we just don't care, that we just do what we want, and it's up to them to respond. We still have to be like Rakshak and Ben here, or like Daniel in chapter 1. We stand for Jesus like Jesus. But we have to recognize and not be surprised by the trial and recognize that we control our response and we can't control others. And to expect that it might upset some people. Now, Gerald Sitzer, in his book on church history, he wrote about 2nd century Christians living in the Roman Empire. And he said that Christians practiced a way of life that passed implicit judgment on Roman society, which is the second reason why Christians were persecuted. They considered themselves citizens of heaven, and they tried to live consistently with that conviction. This orientation toward heaven separated Christians from participating in popular forms of Roman entertainment, which we're familiar with the violent games of Roman entertainment. Another unique thing about Roman entertainment is if they had a play, they would force slaves to be in the play, and then if someone needed to be beaten up or killed in the story, they would actually beat up or kill them in the story. Christian leaders in particular considered Roman entertainment corrupt and thus off limits for the community. Early Christian documents spoke harshly against these popular activities and warned Christians to avoid them. Tacitus, a Roman historian, commented cynically that Christians were haters of humankind because they refused to participate in popular Roman culture, which left the impression that they were anti-Roman. So this has been happening forever. You can just say, I don't think slaves should be killed for entertainment, and well, guess what? You are anti-Roman. You are a hater of humankind. Because non-participation will lead to upsetting. It will lead to a furnace, so to speak. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, I don't think they were planning to get thrown into a furnace here, but I don't think they were surprised by it. I think they saw that coming, but they chose to follow God regardless. They were going to follow him anyway. And then we pick it up in verse 24. We see, well, they didn't avoid the fire. God didn't deliver them from the fire, but we're going to see that he delivers them through it. So we're going to jump back in verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, your majesty. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Pause there. So you remember Nebuchadnezzar's question earlier? What God can save you? Well, now he knows, right? The God of Israel. Now he knows. He sees that there is a God who is with his people, even in the furnace. And these guys, they weren't saved from the furnace, but God literally went into the furnace with them. Tim Keller wrote in his book, Walking with God Through Pain and Suffering, which I think I've said it before and I'll say it again, I think is a required read, that you will never really understand your heart when things are going well. It is only when things go badly that you can see it truly. And that's because it is only when suffering comes that you realize who is the true God and what are the false gods of your lives. Only the true God can go with you through that furnace and out to the other side. The other gods will abandon you in the furnace. I think Nebi asked that question because he only knew of other gods that would abandon you. He didn't know of any God that would have gone in there with you. And then he sees that it looks like there's a son of the gods. It looks like there's a divine being in the furnace with them. And he gives kind of a vague description. You know, he shows off his math skills here, pointing out that 3 is not the same as 4. It's a great job, Your Majesty. You're doing well. But he says it's someone like the son of the gods. And we don't really know who it is. I even wonder if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego knew who it was. I imagine they didn't. But what they would have known is Isaiah 43, verse 2. And it says, "You will pass through the waters, and I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. And when you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." And this is what happened. And so everyone's amazed, and they say, "Hey, get out of there. Come out here." And they call these 3 guys out of the furnace. And as the passage says, there in verse 27, "They saw that the fire had not harmed their body, nor was a hair on their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them." Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him, and he defied the king's commands, and were willing to give up their lives rather than to serve or to worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." And then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. It's an amazing story. Not even a hair on their heads was singed. Now, throughout the Gospels, Jesus faced a lot of trials. He faced a trial in the wilderness when he was tempted for 40 days. He faced a trial before Pontius Pilate, and then before the Roman court, where he was flogged and punched and spat on. And then, of course, he faced the ultimate trial on the cross. And it was in the Garden of Gethsemane when he was looking towards the cross that, he saw something that troubled him so much. The Gospels record that he was sweating blood. And I think what he saw was what he taught about in one of his parables, that God's judgment is like a fiery furnace. And he saw, essentially, the doors to the furnace opening, and he was going to have to walk into it. He knew he was going to have to face that judgment for us. But he willingly walked into it for us. He walked into the fiery furnace carrying our sins, so that in that fire our sins would be consumed, and that there would be justice. And Jesus faced every trial for us. Every trial, and even the ultimate trial. And he did this so that now we will never be alone in whatever furnace that we face. That we will never have to go into it without him. And so from our vantage point, I wonder who was in the furnace with them. I think it's likely it could have been a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. Or if it was an angel like Nebuchadnezzar described, and that works too, because either way, it points us to Jesus, doesn't it? When we look at Daniel 3, we are reminded that we're not always going to be delivered out of the fire, but nonetheless, when we're in it, he is in it with us. We're never alone in the flames because Jesus has entered those places for us. And he has promised to be with us whenever we face trials of our own. And this idea that not a hair on your head will perish, this is an eternal promise. We know that the furnaces we face, we won't always just come through the other side, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But we know that he is able to deliver us, and he's promised us that even if he doesn't deliver us through that, that on the other side of that we'll wake up in his presence, that we'll wake up in his arms, that we'll wake up on the other side of eternity. And we can put our hope and the object of our faith on that. That even if we're not saved from the furnace, through the furnace, we'll end up with him on the other side. That's the faith that we can have when we face these trials. And whether they're brief and little, or they're long and intense, we can endure them because we know that Jesus is with us. And if not, then we'll follow him and he'll bring us home. And as Paul put it, to live as Christ and to die as gain. As Queen Esther put it, if I perish, I perish. Because we have the lens of our faith pointed at Christ. Tim Keller, in that same book, also wrote this. He said, if you remember with grateful amazement that Jesus was thrown into the ultimate furnace for you, you can begin to sense him in your smaller furnaces with you. So this is faith. This is the faith of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The faith that God gives us. The faith that will help us to live in this world and not to hide from it, but to engage with it and to love it, but not just to assimilate and bow down and be so similar that we have nothing to offer. This is the faith that helps us to see that the response to the pressure should often be non-participation, that God is bigger than any idol, and that Jesus is with us in suffering. That faith inevitably leads to the furnace, but nonetheless, he's in there with us. And so today, we're going to be doing communion together. And as we come forward, that's essentially what we are declaring by taking these little cups. We are declaring that the object of our faith, the object of our worship, is the God who is with us in the furnace, the God who poured out his blood for us, the God whose body was broken for us. And we commit to him in this simple act of the God who conquered the world. And so I'm going to invite the band back up, and you are free now to come and get your communion elements. There's also a table in the back there. Reminder, you'll have to peel the top and basically perform surgery on this little cup to get the wafer out. But you are free to get up and grab that now. And we're going to participate in this together, recognizing that we worship the God who has entered the furnace with us, and the one with whom we can bow down. So will you come forward and grab those two? my blood poured out for you for the forgiveness of sins. But every time you drink of it, you proclaim my death and my sacrifice until I return. merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. And blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So grace and peace come around. Have a